Hello, and thank you for tuning in to another episode of our PAC Politics Podcast. Our podcast is brought to you by our United Resource PAC. We are a tax-exempt political organization. Hello. My name is Brittany McDowell. I am the host of this podcast, among many other things, right? Let's talk about stimulus. Guys, in a recent podcast episode, I talked about how you might have been noticing that we weren't really hearing much in the way of stimulus talks anymore in the mainstream media, as some people like to refer to it as. But we actually are starting to hear a little bit of chatter since yesterday, matter of fact. I don't know if you saw it, but yesterday there was a hearing with the Treasury Secretary, Steve Mnuchin, and then it also had the Federal Reserve Chairman, Jerome Powell. And since then, we've been hearing a little bit from some people about economic stimulus, and while I do think that it's something worth noting, I do also want to note that I don't want you to get your hopes up. I still very much agree that we are unlikely to see economic stimulus before the election. But it is worth noting that we are starting to see those talks kind of resume again, or at least it appears to be that way. So that's what we're talking about in this podcast episode. It's not going to be a long one. There are some things to note. There are some things that you need to be aware of. But the main thing you need to be aware of is that, again, I do not think that this is an indication that we are going to see an economic stimulus, a direct economic stimulus for the American people before the election. That said, sit back, tune in, and let's get this Wednesday show started. So I mentioned we're starting to hear talks about stimulus again, but just who is actually talking about stimulus? Well, period, point blank, it seems to be, if you listen, it seems to be that the Democrats are the ones who have kind of revived the conversation around stimulus. Specifically what they're reviving the conversation about, what they're talking about is they're talking about how we need to get another round of economic impact payments directly to Americans, in the hands of individual Americans. An example of this is, again, I mentioned at the start of this episode that we had yesterday on the 22nd, we had the hearing that had our Treasury Secretary, Steve Mnuchin, and the Federal Reserve Chairman, Jerome Powell. During that hearing, there was a representative, a House representative by the name of Al Green. He's a Democrat from Texas. And he basically, mentioned and quite frankly, I would say argued that we are at a point where we need economic impact payments again, because there's a significant risk to Americans now who this goes beyond, them just wanting money for the sake of having money. Like, they're actually in positions where they're about to lose their homes. And we're not just talking about, 5-10 people. This is going to happen on a mass scale. And so that's just like one of the examples among, many others that we had seen if you were able to watch the hearing yesterday. But again, it's the Democrats that are reviving this conversation. Now, again, disclosure, while we are a political organization, we are not affiliated with any political party. However, that does not mean that we will not point out in specific situations like this, when you do have specific political parties that are doing things that are in the best interest of the American people. And specifically regarding this conversation, or this revived conversation around our need for economic stimulus again, where we are seeing this conversation take place, the people who are having this conversation, by and large, tend to be Democrats. We'll talk about the Republicans and what they are saying, if they're saying anything at all, right after this. So let's talk about the Republicans in this situation. Um, for the most part, Republicans are not talking about a specific form of economic stimulus. They are talking about stimulus regarding or stimulus for specific industries, be it the hotel industry, the airline industry. They are talking about stimulus generally in the form of the PPP. You may even hear a few people, I mean, a very few Republicans talk about stimulus for the unemployed, more of that kind of federal bolstered stimulus for those who are in the position where they have to receive unemployment payments. But for the most part, again, Republicans are not talking about stimulus. And when they do, they are not saying very much. I've said before, again, is my as is my favorite phrase now. In a previous episode, I've mentioned how just kind of just as a matter of like a life lesson, you don't want to just always listen to what people say. You want to actually look at what they are doing, right? And so that begs the question: what are the Republicans actually doing on this issue? Well, earlier this month, we saw specifically in the Senate. We saw Republicans there attempt to pass a very small, what some people have called skinny or emaciated bill. They attempted to pass a bill through Congress that included the enhanced unemployment insurance, which for some people was actually a stretch, considering that you have quite a few Republicans who don't, want to help Americans in that regard at all. And it also included small business loans. Now, again, favorite phrase again, I've mentioned in previous episodes how the small business loans that we have seen before, in the form of the PPP, the Paycheck Protection Program, quite frankly, when you look at the various forms of stimulus that this country has seen since March, because again, remember, economic stimulus is not just unemployment payments. It's not just those $1,200 checks. It's not just the PPP. It's not just the Main Street lending program. It's not just a moratorium. It's not just individually those things. The package is the collective of various things. But when you look at the entire package, when you look at the entire stimulus package that we've seen since March, one of the least effective forms of stimulus has been the PPP. Why do I say that? Look at what the program was meant to do and what it actually did. Sure, it did provide for some businesses to, meet their payroll expenses, so on and so forth, for a set amount of time. But once that time kind of went away, there really was not, we didn't see any more impact, right? So for that reason, and I'm not going to like drag out this episode by kind of explaining what I mean by that, but it just, again, we just really didn't see we didn't get the bang for our buck that we were sold on regarding the PPP, which again, I find it interesting that we continue to hear the push for the PPP with both parties, with Democrats and Republicans, but a lot of pushes coming from the Republicans. But anywho, so when we look at the most recent form of stimulus that the Republicans were willing to push in the form of this smaller package, it did not include direct payments to individual Americans. And when I say that, I'm not referencing the unemployment aspect of it, because by and large, that's only it's only targeted to those who are in a specific situation, people who are receiving unemployment benefits. But that $1,200 that we had seen before, that was more general. The only thing that really kind of kept people from getting that is if they made too much money, right? And people making too much money probably received other forms of stimulus depending on, what they did for a living. If they had a business, maybe they got the PPP, so on and so forth. But again, another subject for another day with that program, right? But so that's when we look at what Republicans are saying, specifically regarding stimulus, they are not saying the same things as Democrats, and they're really not saying much at all in way of specifically checks for individual Americans. And I really want you to kind of pay attention, because just even if you happen to, for instance, see the hearing that happened yesterday, there were various points. One of the things you really have to be aware of when you are listening to politicians is you have to be aware of the way in which they use language, right? Like, for instance, they'll say something along the lines of, yeah, we support stimulus. And in your mind, because you have an idea of what stimulus is and what it should look like, you assume that they mean that they agree with stimulus in the form of sending you and your family a $1,200 check. But in their mind, for them, stimulus is just giving money in the form of the PPP or the Main Street Lending Program, or specifically to only, specific industries such as the airline industry or the hotel industry. So I really want you to look at the way in which they use language, because they can use language in a way where they are very, very, very aware of the fact that other people, even though they say one thing, people who are listening may hear something completely different, something that actually works to their benefit. It works to their benefit when you think that they mean that they're going to send you a check, but what they actually mean is they're going to send the airline industry a check, or they're going to send a hotel a check. They have no intention of sending you a check at all. But so one more thing that I want to note here, because I don't want to make this very, very long. I referenced how Representative Al Green from Texas talked about how, Americans are losing their homes. One thing that was of particular importance that he mentioned as well was that there is this agency called the Government Accountability Office, and they found that the Treasury Department actually lacked data on a number of people who actually qualified for the first stimulus that we received, that set of checks that we received back in March, that was approved back in March, right? But specifically, they lacked data regarding the people who were supposed to receive them, but actually didn't yet receive them. That kind of struck me, because think about it. How often is it that the government decides to not track a specific, bit of information or a specific metric? Like, the government really keeps data for the government is very, very big. That also brings to mind another example of something we saw during the hearing. When the Federal Reserve Chairman, Jerome Powell, was kind of getting when we saw this kind of push where we were during the hearing, or the question was posed. I'm trying to think of the specific question. It was something along the lines of what exactly, when you guys came and you thought about the amount of stimulus that is needed to be adequate, what was that number? And this is kind of in reference. I apologize if I'm not kind of quoting it correctly or exactly, but we get a lot of pushback when we hear about how Nancy Pelosi is demanding that they be willing to stimulate the economy with $2.2 trillion, right? And you get a lot of pushback, and you hear, well, we don't need to spend that much money. Da, 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 da. But one of the things we saw during the hearing yesterday was this claim that, well, there is no specific number that we've determined to be adequate. People just kind of come up with their own numbers. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? You mean to tell me that people who are working on behalf of our government are not tracking data? They don't have kind of basic numbers. They don't have data about people who've received checks. They have data about the dead people they sent checks to. They have data about fraudulent. You know what? Let me stop. Let me stop. But just, I want you to think, like, how often is it that, not only does our government lack data, but they kind of are able to claim this, they're able to claim ignorance, right? Well, yeah, we don't know how much money it's going to cost to stimulate the economy. We don't know. We don't have information about the people who were supposed to receive checks that didn't. Are you kidding me? If you don't, I'm sorry, you don't need to be in the position where you're sending out those checks. If you don't know how much money is going to take to stimulate the economy at an adequate level, you don't need to be in a position where you're even in that conversation. Like, are you kidding me? But here's the deal. I want you to realize something, and I'm going to end this here. I want you to be aware that they're doing this because they recognize that the information that you would become aware of, if they presented you, just say, with that number that is adequate in terms of stimulating the economy, or the number of Americans that qualified for a stimulus check but still hadn't received it. They don't want to tell you those numbers, not because they can't figure them out. These people are very, very smart. They don't want to tell you those numbers because you would have something to gain. You would have something to gain, or the other political party would have something to gain if they made it clear that X amount of people still hadn't received their checks, or if they made it clear that, you know what, yeah, Republicans are pushing for $1 trillion. No, not even that. $500 billion in stimulus spending, but we actually need somewhere around 1.82. Just kind of throwing some numbers out there. They don't want to tell you that, because what it would do is it would look bad for, even though these people claim to be not politically motivated and not really into the politics. Truth be told, they are representing a political party. They're representing a political administration, right? They are representing the Trump administration, and anything that speaks against the narrative that administration is trying to push is something that I can guarantee you they have been advised they need to fall in line with. You need to fall in line with the narrative that we are pushing. Otherwise, you have got to go. How many people have we seen get the boot from this administration because they weren't willing to toe the line? So don't you think for a second that that is not what we are seeing here, when we are being told that, well, gee, we don't have those numbers. We can't figure out those numbers. Oh, yes, you can. You just don't want to, because you want to keep your job. I can't fault you for that, but at least be honest about it, right? But then again, we can't expect that they're going to say, well, I can't give you those numbers because, if I do, I'm going to lose my job. I mean, we know for a fact they're not going to do that, but at least I want you to be aware of the fact that that is what we are seeing here. These people are not dumb. They can count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. They know that the numbers would not serve their political narrative very well, which is why we are not getting those numbers. So that, my friends, is what we are hearing, the very little that we are hearing from Republicans in terms of talks on economic stimulus. Are you on Facebook? We're on Facebook. Check out our Facebook page in the description box of this episode. We have our blog posts. We share our latest episodes. We share relevant information related to COVID-19, economic stimulus, and relief. Again, we do it all on our Facebook page. Check it out in the description box of this episode. See you there. All right, so sure, we're hearing talks of stimulus again, right? Specifically from one political party more so than the other. But we are not a podcast that is just about bringing you the news. As was previously stated, we're a political organization. And so that said, we're focused on solutions here. Look at the House Democrats. They are proving that they actually care about the American people based on the fact that they've been willing to have conversations about another round of coronavirus relief payments, specifically and exclusively for and to individual Americans. When we look at what's going on with the Senate and we look at the Republicans there, Senate Republicans, they attempted earlier this month, they attempted to pass this skinny bill. They attempted to, quite frankly, pass a bill that was not adequate in terms of the stimulus that it would provide the economy at large. But more specifically, what they attempted to pass attempted to help businesses, but it did not attempt to help in a sufficient manner individual Americans and their families. And so, as an organization, one of the things that we're gearing up to do is we're gearing up to run political ads supporting House Democrats who support giving individual Americans a stimulus check. Period, point blank. You want to support the American people, we want to support you. On the flip side, we're also planning to run political ads against, not just in this current election cycle, but in future election cycles, because not all of these people are up for re-election, right? But we're planning to run ads against Senate Republicans who think that they can refuse to help the American people and still keep their jobs. We're not going for that, right? But we need your help to make it happen. If you can, I ask that you partner with us in running these political ads just by making a simple contribution. Whatever you can contribute is definitely appreciated. It can be any amount that you choose. But you're under no obligation to assist. But if you can, we definitely would appreciate it. Political ads is what we are in the business of doing, and we can't pay for those ads with more power to the people. We actually need money to pay for those ads. So if you can, check out the description box of this episode to help us with what you can. But if you can't, that's okay as well. In advance, if you decide to help, thank you, because we cannot push for this cause, the cause of making sure the American people have what they need in the form of economic stimulus without you. So again, in advance, thank you so much. Hey, this is Brittany. Just wanted to shoot you a quick reminder. Look in the description box of this episode and you can find a link to our website. On our website, you can find our latest blog posts. You can find our contact information. You even want to make a contribution, you can go over there and do that as well. You can find out the policies we are looking at and targeting as an organization. I say all the time that we are a tax-exempt political organization. If you want to know more about that, again, go on over to our website, our-pac.com, where you can find out everything you want to know. You can do everything you want to do. We will gladly welcome you on our website with open arms. Again, check out our website in the description box below. All right, so I said it before at the start of this episode, and I will say it one more time before we end this episode. Guys, we are hearing talks again about economic stimulus, okay? But I want you to hear me out. In my professional opinion, more likely than not, the type of economic stimulus that most of my listeners are actually looking to see most likely will not be seen until after the election. And quite frankly, depending on who gets the White House and kind of what the makeup is of, I'm not questioning what the House will look like, but what the Senate, who actually controls the Senate, depending on what we see there, we may or may not see stimulus at all, quite frankly. But if we are going to see it, most likely it is not going to happen until after the election. So that said, be aware that there is conversation happening again, but I don't think that it's likely to lead us in the direction of actually seeing some form of economic stimulus sometime soon. Yes, the Democrats are talking, and they're talking about how they want to help you. The Republicans are talking, and they're talking about how they want to help the airline industry, and they want to help the hotels. Everyone is talking. Talks have started. The chatter has started a little bit. You're even hearing the chatter about how, we don't know what the numbers are about, how many people we need to actually, how much stimulus is actually needed to stimulate the economy. Okay, don't buy it, don't believe it, but another subject for another day, right? But we're starting to hear some conversation. But again, at this point, I don't think it's likely to lead to action. So if you get out there and you listen to, YouTubers and stuff, and, people who, especially those people who are just in the business of providing you the news, I want you to be aware of something, okay? Not all, but some of those people, they are just looking for clickbait. So when you see those YouTube videos that are out there that say, we've got a stimulus package coming because of the hearing yesterday, or, stimulus approved, like, no, it's not approved right now, okay? So just be advised of that. Be aware of these sources that you were listening to, and question the motives. I mean, even on our end, question our motives. But again, I think I make it pretty clear what our motive is, right? We're a political organization, and we're actually looking to have political influence. We're not just bringing you the news. We're trying to bring you solutions to this problem of not having enough economic stimulus, right? And we believe that solution is in the form, partially, of giving you direct cash payments from our government, which is what we are pushing for, which is why we want to run ads against people who want to keep that money from you, because you absolutely need it, not just for your personal economy, but to actually help the economy at large. So that said, thank you so much for tuning in to this episode. I tried to keep it pretty brief. I hope I did that for you today, right? Because I have found myself in situations where I've had pretty lengthy episodes. But that said, have a good rest of your day. And again, thank you for tuning in. My name is Brittany McDowell, and you have been listening to our PAC Politics Podcast, the podcast for the organization, our United Resource PAC. Have a good one, guys, and I will see you Friday.